from the UK, broadcasting around the world. You're listening to the Mic Drop Club, hosted by Douglas Hammond-Dishay. Message received. You do not need to know what you need. Just engage with the podcast feed. Providing weekly insights into cool stuff we've read, saw, did, or heard about what made us say, wow, eureka, damn, nothing is off limits. If it motivates and inspires you to reach your goals, then it shall be discussed. Featuring guest interviews from high performers and people of influence, and weekly awards for the best mic drop moment. This podcast is guaranteed to leave you pumped up for the week ahead. Don't just live life. Make life boom.
Hi everybody, it's Douglas Hammond-Dishay for another episode of the Mic Drop Club. Today, I am super stoked. This one has been a long time in the making. I have the fabulous Rachel Murphy in the house. She's an entrepreneur, a real rock house of inspiration and motivation. She's a business mentor, public speaker, health executive. I could tell you more plaudits and more accolades that she's done and will accomplish in the future. So please, with no further ado, welcome Rachel Murphy to the Mic Drop Club. Rachel, how are you doing?
Hey Douglas, yeah, I'm good, thank you. Yeah, very happy to be here.
Fantastic. And as I said in the intro, this one for me is a long time coming. I've been following you on LinkedIn, and every time, and right off the bat, let's do a confession. You started, I think 11 days ago, a commitment, and you've done a public affirmation that you're going to put out content for 20 days. You're right. And I saw that and I thought, okay, wow, I've been kind of slacking. And
it's time to dial it up, mate.
I've been slacking. So when I see your post on the feed, straight away I run like a rabbit. I go post something. If it means I'm walking somewhere, I have to post. So just to keep up. And this is what we need in life is trendsetters, pacemakers, people that you know are going to help hold you to account. And I must say, Rachel, you've held me to account. I've not lapsed at all. For 11 days straight, I've posted content. And typically I do 2 or 3 times a week. But this time I've been consistently doing that. So, Rachel, tell me a bit about your journey. Like, how did you get into the executive space that you're in?
So how did I get in? I guess I came out of school and I knew, Douglas, that going to uni, I would get pissed and not get a degree. So I knew that wasn't a particularly good plan. So I went straight into work. But I have only ever worked as an interim for organisations. I started out with the Big Five, so I had time with KPMG, PwC and Accenture in my early 20s. And then I kind of moved into a world of interim management, lots of turnaround stuff, lots of transformation, and across public and private sector, and had the pleasure of working abroad a fair bit. So I guess you can deduce from that some level of commitment issue in way of staying anywhere for any period of time. But I'm always excited about kind of getting the party started, bringing the energy, driving the change. But at the point it becomes business as usual, that gig is almost certainly somebody else's.
Sure. Excellent. And did you find that outlook on life helps you not only avoid some of the stale processes that we see in businesses, like the underlying culture of organization, when they know that you're not going to stay there for a long time, you don't get involved in the politics as much?
Well, I certainly try not to get involved in the politics. I mean, the nature of some of the roles I've had, you don't have any choice. But for me, I'm a delivery girl. So I'm particularly interested in getting the job done. And I'm really not interested in we've tried this before. this hasn't worked. Why are we doing it again? For me, it's about, let's really galvanize the troops, paint a picture of the art of the possible, and then make it happen.
Excellent. And right on cue. So getting people on the journey in digital transformation across the NHS is a real challenge. And being able to paint a picture for people who are not in the best state of mind, they're under pressure to deliver care to their patients. How do you go about doing it? What sort of ways do you help people visualize, there is a better way of actually working?
So I think the key bit around this is to create a value proposition of what you're actually going to do. And whether that's a value or a visual prop. When I was leading Empower the Person for the NHS, which was the programme that ultimately brought NHS app, nhs.uk, and Wi-Fi into hospitals, we had to build out a visual proposition that said we're moving from NHS Choices to a repository of content, nhs.uk, that's written for age 8, which is the UK standard for reading, and building out live transactional services. So what we did is we actually mocked up what we thought it was going to look like. And it's a real balancing act, Douglas, because people inherently look at it and think that is exactly what's going to show up. And, the reality is we had a big program of work looking at the user research, at the service design. So we didn't know it was going to exactly look like that, but we had to paint a picture to get buy-in across staff, across clinicians, across patients. And I think as certainly as patients and users started to see a value creation, then they bought in. But let's face it, people are people, and people are lazy, and they are not going to go and do something unless there's a value creation for them. And that was that was the that was the whole point of it. Give you access to your own medical records, give you the ability to request repeat prescriptions, give you the ability to donate your data to the NHS, and the quid pro quo is you can get these things electronically and you can walk around with a repository of all of your medical information. So that was the value proposition. Of course, overnight that didn't happen. It was a big job. It was a lot of people, and it was hard graft.
Yeah, I can imagine that. And if we take back the listeners to a place where medical records were just becoming digitized. We've had, since healthcare began, paper-based records. So it was a fundamental change, transformation program of which there are multiple facets, and you were part of that. So in our process, when you're selling that picture, to convince, they always talk about win over hearts and minds and all that kind of stuff. What sort of techniques do you employ to get that message across? What
you see is what you get. So I'm very open, and I'm very honest, and I'm very authentic in that. So it's very much, explaining it is going to be a serious amount of work. But the reality is we're in this together. I'm not asking people to do anything I wouldn't do myself. But the end game here is that we can make a fundamental difference. I'm not sure that there has been, there's always talk about transformation in government and healthcare, but I'm not sure that there is truly innovative transformation on the scale that the NHS app, nhs.uk is. That happens very few times. So I think, by really being able to articulate to the team that we're on the precipice of doing something pretty monumental, people are excited about that. And I guess being able to paint that picture, and explain that we weren't going to try and do this the same way they tried to deliver stuff before. We kind of forced the hand of the NHS to create an environment in Victoria, it was, for digital staff to co-locate and to work together and move away from, old school Gantt charts and move to a very agile way of working. We had a user research lab in the building where we brought patients in. It was very much bringing it all the way up to speed in way of how in ways of working. And that again was exciting because we weren't asking digital professionals to come in and work in the NHS in a kind of dry and staid environment. It was cutting edge. And so it was an easier sell, and cutting edge is not synonymous with the NHS, mate, as you know.
Absolutely. However, within NHS stereotypical digital transformation programs, words such as excitement, authenticity, this real value driven, using natural language was not the norm, certainly in the earlier days. Saying authenticity, putting yourself out there was like, wow, because I worked with quite a few digital transformation agents over my time, and they came from the business change management school of thought. And you could tell that their thought processes were more aligned to conveyor belt manufacturing, task orientated. This needs to be done. Then you come across with this really refreshing, revolutionary way of putting yourself out there. Like, look at me. I'm doing it. I'm with you. I'm part of the team. Let's roll. That must have been still a shock to the executive suite when they see that.
I think it was a massive shock to them. And we weren't entirely popular the whole time. I sort of rolled in with my SRO, Juliet Bauer, and we disbanded 10 program boards that made up that program of work, and we moved to one, and we got rid of over 100 people that were sitting on boards, and we were serially unpopular at that time. But the reality was a lot of that was a talking shop, Douglas. It wasn't adding any value, and we moved to a monthly meeting where we were actually showing Empower the Person board members what we were building. We were doing a show and tell. Now, I know this sounds like pointing out the bleeding obvious, but that had not happened. So they'd been signing off business cases, they had been signing off checks for various things, but they hadn't actually seen what they were investing in. So we turned it on its head, and I think that then bought us some buy-in from the top of the shop as well.
Excellent. So you're working across both parameters, top, bottom, as well, to get that broad consensus to move forward. How much of your previous non-NHS background did you feed into, and are you continuing to feed into the work that you're doing, helping entrepreneurs, helping businesses get established? And because there's something here I find really profound, and I'm seeing it more and more with the advent of AI. Taking a look at companies, and they're saying, look, with this technology, ChatGPT, you can scale up very quickly, you can add more value potentially, and you can start to get rid of processes that you don't need, i.e. people, because you've got more capabilities yourself.
Yeah.
Having that ability yourself in terms of how you view a company structure. How are you leveraging this whole thing? How are you seeing this thing all play out in the support you're giving companies?
So that's a great question. I'm going to answer that two ways. The businesses that I love the most are people-orientated businesses. And what I mean by that is I think I like a bit of chaos, Douglas. I like people. They're unique, they're individual, and it's services businesses, professional services businesses that I am wanting to work with, and that's the bulk of my experience. So in answering your question, two ways. One, I saw a lot of entrepreneurial and intrapreneurial skills in the NHS, a phenomenal amount. And I think because it's a breeding ground for a shed load of process and governance, you then inherently have people who want to move around that process and governance in a unique way, which for me, I don't say that as a negative, say that as a serious positive. That entrepreneurial thinking, let's speed this up, this is a drainer, we can do it better, we can do it faster. So I've worked with loads of entrepreneurs. If I look even at my senior management team, so my directors, when I was at NHSD running Empower the Person, there was probably 6 or 7. I would say 80% have gone on to build their own business since that gig. So that tells its own story, mate. And they're wildly successful. Certainly one of them has sold his business. One has taken VC investment. Every which way. But answering the second part of your question around leveraging, what we've got from a technology perspective at the minute with AI, ChatGPT, there's so much that we can do at leveraging these tools. But I will always come back to the fact that it's people-based businesses that are of particular interest to me. Will these tools allow me to move faster? Yes. But there is still a real need for the individual involvement of people. And that I'm never going to get away from that. I had this conversation with my brothers the other day who both work in financial services, both entrepreneurs, and it won't replace for me. It will enhance, and we all better learn how to use these bloody tools. I guess my thought process prevents me thinking it's going to replace, because I just have a vision of, Sarah Connor and Terminator 2. So maybe it's self-preservation.
Okay, guys, everybody ready?
Atomic.
That's your first mic drop. You brought in Terminator, Sarah Connor. You cannot talk about AI without going to the foundation.
Skynet.
Skynet, yeah, that's correct. Or as my grandmother used to say, the interweb. Skynet, yes, it's so important. I think we're at the precipice, using your own words there, where you can, what's it called? X factor the human. The human now has more capabilities as a single entity, but we're still very a communal-based species. We need that human interaction to other human beings. So how that plays out in terms of the innovation, the type of solutions that are available. For so many years, we'll say the NHS has been ring-fenced in terms of where we look for our solutions. And when you come with a broad spectrum of experience in outside sectors, what sort of tools do you think we can bring into the NHS that will really add that value? We know we've got the traditional EPR scenario, the traditional monolithic system or best of breed, but still, there's still not that revolution, I would say, when it comes to keying in patient data, retrieving patient data that you find across different industries, such as banking, does not reflect how you used to write a check. It's completely different experience. So
I've got a long answer to this one, Douglas. I'm trying to condense it in my head. Okay. I don't think let's talk EPR systems first of all. I don't think the answer is Epic and Cerner for all of the questions that are being asked in this space. I'd say they're the 80-20 rule, and I would say that they probably are the master data source for a lot of hospital-based patient stuff. But I work as non-exec director for a digital cancer platform company, Careology. And, what you don't have in an EPR is that deep domain knowledge of a condition. And so That's why I think that they will hit probably 80%, but you're going to have edge cases that require plugging some of these systems together to make it as powerful as it should be from a patient perspective. And that's where interoperability comes in, which I have to say, this is where I come across as a bit of a geek loser. This is probably one of my favourite subjects because technically I think interop actually has been nailed quite a while ago. We've been pushing FHIR standards since I was sitting in the NHS. So technically I don't think that is so much of a challenge. More it's the appetite to want to go and do it. And if I was a vendor, if I use the term owned in inverted commas, patient data, would I want to open up and run the risk of loads of other systems coming in and interfacing? I'd be wary. And so I understand the reticence, but the reality is, you're missing the bloody point. This is patient data and it should be donated to the NHS and owned by the patient, in my personal opinion. And I think that's where we need to get to in way of...
okay, guys, everybody ready?
And that is where you get a big atomic mic drop. This is what we've been championing on this platform for the longest period. I salute you on that one. And you said it best, the companies, vendors have to be thinking more about the benefit, the true benefit to the patient, opposed to their bottom line, which typically end, the challenges they might get from a competitor coming in, plugging in, pulling data, then adding value to that data, sophisticating that data, then ultimately taking over that regional vendor's lunch or whatever whatever way they want to term it. I'm with you 1,000%. Also, just to explore that a bit more, when we take a look at the patient, and if we are good shepherds or good stewards of the patient, if the patient moves, which they do move around the globe, and we're chasing the patient, saying, no, make sure you put your data in our system, make sure you put your data in our system. Well, it gets to a tipping point whereby the mobilization of the patient will dictate that your system cannot keep up. If my auntie, my grandma moves from up north to down south, the quality of care changes because the access to the complete record is different. The deep insights into her conditions are not really there. And also, take a look at patient-recorded data, which, I've got my iWatch on, but there's data on these devices that are far richer and more patient-specific than what's held in this EPR system. But how then do we create that world where, that is a more seamless, informative, experience for not only the clinician to help support the care, but also the patient to be empowered, to be piloting their own recovery?
I think that's a really good point. And I think the reality is that's what really starts to drive prevention, because if people take responsibility and accountability, then of course, they are wanting to be proactive about sharing that data. So it goes back to the point, technically, it's absolutely possible, but this is about commercials. Let's get down to it. This is about commercials. This is about owning, a piece of the pie. So I think that, and the way that we started to address this from a GP perspective was by opening up the GP Connect contract and allowing, more suppliers on. So it wasn't a monopoly and wasn't dominated. But the reality today is, we have a load of data sitting on the NHS app. I mean, I was born in 78. I know, I look younger. But I was born in 78. I actually feel bloody older this morning. But my record on the app only goes back to 82, probably because those 4 years were out and out paper and they haven't been transferred over. And so I have a shed load of data I walk around with every day, but I don't have everything. I've had a couple of dental surgeries this year. I've had some procedures done to investigate some stuff. They're not sitting on there. And that's because primary and secondary data is not all being held or even meshed together in any smart way. But from a patient perspective, and for Joe Average, here's the news. they think the NHS is one massive entity, and they're not interested that it's 20,000 different organisations. Most people don't know what primary and secondary are unless they work in the system. They just want access to their data. And I'll just share, Douglas, if you don't mind, a personal story. My stepdaughter is in kidney failure. I'm waiting for a kidney transplant at the minute. And the Easter Friday, she got a call. She's on the list. And there was a kidney they thought was going to be a good match. It didn't transpire to be a good match. That's not actually the part of the story. The point of the story, it is part of the story. But what happened was Charlotte lives in York. She's under a nephrologist in Leeds. She went to Leeds to wait for the kidney to arrive so they could do the transplant. But she'd been in at York before. And even between York Hospital and Leeds, they can't share data. So they didn't know what Charlotte had been. She'd been admitted a couple of weeks before. She'd had a high temperature, had some, investigations. Even between those two hospitals, and we're talking less than an hour drive, they couldn't share the data. So, I then have my ex-wife saying to me, you work in the system, why can they not share the data? And this goes back to the point about these EPR systems and about, a patient, Joe Average, roaming around should have access to all this information. Are we really expecting people to print off letters and carry that around with them the whole time? The thing when you get a call up for a kidney is, I don't know whether you know the process, but the police do a ring around. They show up at the house. You have very limited time to get to the hospital to go and have the transplant. It's not the time to be running around the house trying to find paperwork. So, that's a real life example in the last couple of weeks where you're thinking this is so incredibly basic and so frustrating that we haven't improved. And these are basics. This is not, as transformational as no longer using a check, your example in banking, but it's basic and we should be able to do better.
Absolutely. As I think we started off, and thank you for sharing that. And I do wish the best. It's very difficult, and I really thank you for your openness and frankness on that story. We can all learn lessons, and it does paint that picture in terms of where are we now, what is actually happening on the ground. I think COVID has made us all expert health consumers.
Yeah. Agreed.
So our expectations of the NHS and any health provider has increased, but that's not been matched by what is available on the ground. And that friction needs to be smoothed out by a resetting, as it were. Where are we now? Do we think, because COVID, Brexit, let's put them both out there, NHS. Are we thinking outwardly as a nation should be in the post-Brexit, post-COVID environment? Are we looking at solutions that are locally definable and available, like tech companies that are British? How do you see this playing out in the next, we say because AI is changing everything at a rapid pace, so no 5-year projections. What's happening now?
So I really like your point about COVID making us all kind of experts in consuming, and different models of care arrived during COVID, and I think that's a positive. We saw adoption of telehealth, of virtual care, of remote care in a way that I'm not sure we would have ever seen, because it was very slow on the uptake prior to COVID. But it's not one size fits all. It's not, I can't phone my GP and get an appointment. I can, because it's on the phone for an hour, and then I'll get they'll call you back at some point. Well, the problem is I spend most of my life in a meeting or on a call. So I then miss that call. They're probably frustrated thinking she hasn't answered. I'm thinking, what am I supposed to be doing, taking a day off waiting for a frigging phone call? It's not good enough. And what I end up doing is when I need to see a GP, I will then go and pay to see one privately. But, lucky me, I can afford to do that. I still don't think that's right. So I think we've seen an adoption of varying different technologies. But if we go back, Douglas, to the start of COVID, I don't think I've seen any improvement on some of these video platforms during that period of time. I have a preference. I probably prefer Zoom, mainly because it's got that little feature that makes you look a little bit better. But anyway, that's by the by. If you've had a tired night, we all need a bit of help, mate. But, where has the improvement been? Or even that's on basic video platforms during that period of time. That's been limited. So to answer your question, I think we really need to fix some of the absolute basics before looking at some of the sexier technologies. And that's a heartbreaking statement for somebody that works in my industry and can see the real benefit of some of this. But I think we're well past saying we're losing the audience. I think that there is huge frustration with the NHS, misdirected. Personally, I think that frustration should be government from a funding perspective, but we won't go off on a political rant and we'll never get back. But I do think that we've got, the advent of things like ChatGPT, of AI, and even, machine learning at best, I think, rather than AI for plenty of these use cases. But it's powerful. It's incredibly powerful, this stuff that's coming down the road. And we do need to be able to leverage it. And the NHS is about caring for sick people. Rather than prevention.
Okay, guys, everybody ready?
Atomic.
Mic drop there. Mic drop. We need to reset. Going from a sickness-based care model to a preventative recovery-based model is where we're looking for. So no, I salute you for that one. Mic drop.
But I think that there is a real need to think about the NHS as the care part of the service, and how do we plug into this innovation? We shouldn't expect it's all going to be designed within the system. We need to leverage some of this stuff outside, whether it's SMEs, whatever it is. We need to work together and do that. During COVID, we saw the rule book got chucked out the window, and we moved at breakneck speed on stuff. My previous business, we designed and built the home testing service for COVID-19. We put it live in 8 days. And
Wow.
That is mind-blowing in way of the speed at which you'd normally build these services. 3 months later, we dispatched 1 million test kits out across the UK. And the reality is these things can happen. Now, we set fire to the rule book. I get that because we had no choice. But we shouldn't accept moving back to an incredibly slow way of working either. So there's got to be some sort of halfway house on innovation and moving things forward without it costing the earth, breaching bloody procurement rules. Do you know what I mean? There's got to be a blend.
I like that. That was slightly cryptic. I got what you were saying there. There has to be a blend, because breaking the procurement rules, we know that happens. Technology, what we do know is technology's got cheaper. It's way cheaper. All right. But the deployments of some of this technology has gone exponentially higher. I still can't fathom how tech right now is being at its cheapest and continues to go down. But some of the deployments I'm reading about across the NHS is not only breaking the trusts, and also stopping those trusts from truly innovating and bringing the best talent, because they can't afford to pay those staff the money to come there. They cannot afford to upgrade their estates. But they will say, hey, look, got a shiny piece of tech. It shouldn't cost the arm and the leg. You shouldn't be talking about the north of £20 million for a computer system. You're not sending something to orbit. You're not doing that. it's not complicated. It's not that complicated. So
I'd like to send some of those suppliers to orbit that are charging the system that.
Can you imagine that? So this whole thing about in a post-Brexit, because Brexit is playing a big part of what's happening now as well.
Massive.
So the companies that you are supporting, both within the NHS and outside the NHS, do they have that global outlook in terms of, are they still looking for solutions that are very UK specific?
No, I think the market's shifting. I think that there was a lot of money poured in from investment into health by VCs, by private equity. I think, to be honest, with half-baked idea, money was being thrown out windows 12, 18 months ago. And I think all of that is now tightened up, global economic situation. And what you therefore see is a reduction of people investing in this space, and it starts to have a knock-on effect in way of, what's available, who's doing what where, and how is it kind of happening. So I think the tightening up there is definitely causing a challenge. But I think some of this is the thinking, and it seems to be quite cyclical. So when I first came into government, we're going back 10 years ago now, maybe longer, but, we were moving towards a world of open source. We were moving away from proprietary, moving away from big SIs getting deals. And it feels like we're going back. We're going through a different wave at the minute where, the answer is an SI, not an SME, which has not been the agenda for a period. And the difficulty there is the cost, not just of the software, but the implementation, the on-cost to make all this stuff happen. Now, the one caveat I will say, Douglas, is it is not easy implementing software in the NHS because people are doing 5 different jobs. They are burnt out and some. They are more than change fatigue. But they, I think probably more complexity implementing in the NHS than other sectors for those reasons. But the reality is, without moving some of this stuff forward, we stand still, and people will continue to be doing the same things in 5-10 years' time. And back to the example of banking, that's not acceptable when the world is moving this fast.
Absolutely. And I want to just divert slightly away from the NHS specific stuff, because as you rightly said, we could go on forever trying to rectify the problems. Yeah. I want to talk about how you help companies, and typically what are the main pitfalls that you see company directors making with their companies, and how can they avoid some of these pitfalls?
So I've spent the last 12 months working with probably 80 different entrepreneurs across various sectors, majority in healthcare. And what I've built a program that helps founders and entrepreneurs to maximize the value of their business prior to sale. And if I talk about the mistakes that I see, I think mistake number 1 that I see is not having a clearly articulated sell pack, which really lays out, where the business has come from and what the opportunity is for a potential buyer. And what by definition happens is lots of founder owners are knee deep in the business, head down, selling some deals, helping deliver. We're all in the mix. We're probably not fulfilling the CEO role day in, day out. From personal example at different, I was in lots of different areas. And the difficulty then is you're not clear. The mistake is that you're not clear on what the value of the business is and what the market's doing, the market conditions. So certainly having a clear sell pack and understanding the value of your business, I think is mistake number 1, in way of someone comes knocking and you kind of take the first offer. I think that's a big mistake.
Do you find a lot of directors or owners undervalue or go to the opposite extreme and overvalue their business, but not based upon up-to-date research?
I think, but on the latter point, Douglas, I think some of it is absolute fantasy island. I don't even think it's anything like research. It's the you've heard about a multiplier. You think you're this sort of business, but the reality is, you could be doing a serious number in way of revenue, but if you haven't got the processes in place, if it's not repeatable businesses, if you're predicated on the superhero mentality of somebody, jumping in and doing deals and working a 16-hour day, that stuff is really hard to value because any buyer almost has to keep exactly the same components in place, and that's not scalable. And that is what these buyers are looking for.
No, absolutely. And just to build with you that one, I've supported some companies as well, SMEs and startups. And I always ask them, what roles are you doing? And they give me a long raft. I'm doing this, I'm doing that, And I said, okay, fine. Draw out an organizational chart of all the roles that your company has to fulfill. Not that it actually has in place, but has to fulfill it for it to meet a certain value. So they'll go through all the roles from COO, marketing, sales, executive, all of those roles are done. And then I say, write down all the roles that you are actually doing yourself. And typically they tick their name against most of these roles. Then I ask them, okay, how are you going to fire yourself, sack yourself from some of these jobs? And that's when they get stuck. They don't know how to. And it goes back to your point about processes. So when you do the USP, your value proposition, all of those things, you should have your Bible should be your list of processes. Like if you go to McDonald's and you go to their secret vault, not only you find the ingredients for their cheeseburgers, which are epic, but I take out the cheese for some reason. But you find their processes to flip those burgers, to do the fries. And that is where the value comes in, because you can, Absolutely. As you said, you can repeat the process. So how many businesses actually have that Bible that they can show? Here's a process end to end to do something, so that, as you said earlier about the reading age that we have to put out content is typically for an 8-year-old. That's the reading. Where is that manual in every business for all the processes? Before we even get to the point of saying that now is worth this amount of money, where is that, and how do they produce that?
And that's part of certainly what I do with companies on the first module of this program. So it looks at really understanding the key assets that make up your business, building out a data room, and then building out a sale pack that looks at competition, but also is honest, Douglas, and talks about weaknesses you've got in your company. Now that may seem totally the polar opposite of what you'd expect a potential seller of a business to do. But here's the news. If you're not open and honest about that stuff, as you go through due diligence and heads of terms, it's going to bite you in the arse anyway. So why not get up front? And then, you stand a much better chance of actually attracting a buyer who knows what they're on the hook for. And they're not expecting people to be bloody experts in every conceivable area. So that's something I'm going to be encouraging businesses to be very upfront about. And it's, a different example, but one of the module 3 looks at exit strategy. And within exit strategy, I'm asking some really pointed questions of the founders and the owners about what do they really want to do when they sell the business. Do they want to chill out on a yacht and do nothing for the rest of their life? If they do, happy days. Let's make that happen.
Guilty on all counts. I told you this earlier. I got this vision of being on a yacht and having my white suit on, and singing Rio, Duran Duran,
Mate, you better be rocking those glasses and that white suit. That's all I can say.
Miami Vice.
It's funny because for me, I knew I wasn't going to be somebody who could sell the business and go off and, sort of chill out on the beach for 12 months. That was going to freak me out. But it's important, because if you're a CEO who doesn't want to do that, you're going to need to put a managing director in place so you're freed up to go and do what you fancy for the next gig. And it's starting to think about and tease these out. Another example is it was incredibly important to me that the business that bought my company, the culture was aligned to mine. I didn't want my staff going to work somewhere that I didn't feel the culture was aligned.
Interesting, great point.
Yeah, and that. So I actually spent a lot of time using a technique, Woodley mapping, to map the culture of these organisations. And again, that's something we look at in Module 3 because the amount of owners that I've spoken to, this is super important to them. Their business is like family, and everybody's very tightly knit. And the one bit that's holding them back about selling the business is they're so nervous about where their staff are off to.
Wow, that's a point I've never really reflected on. It's a great point. It's a great point. It's the continuation of your life, really. And your business has been your life for a period of time. Then, visualizing it with the same way you visualize the creation to the post.
Yeah,
it's so important. Wow. Do you have any tips for helping business owners deal with it? For me, there is a fear around going for VC. And how do they reconcile that fear?
Yeah, I think it's understanding what you've got. It's asking yourself some pointy questions about where are you going and what do you personally really want. VC may well be the answer, but I think until you've built out a data room, you've built the cell pack, you've got a key list of the processes and the governance on how your business operates, you really understand the services that you're selling. And, the reality is plenty of us should be retiring some of the services because here's the news, no one's freaking buying them. And we should perhaps be looking at, do we pivot some of the stuff that we're doing? But when you've answered some of these fundamental questions, I think, it then allows you, and you've got an idea of what the true valuation of the business is. It actually allows you to make some decisions about, if you still got that grit and energy in you to drive it to the next level. If you have, why not take some VC money in? But, the reality is they are going to own your ass. That's it. Now, everyone, they say it much more politely than that, Douglas, but here's the news. No one rolls in with a shed load of dough and you don't retain the cash and the bloody responsibility the entire time. So if you're taking a big chunk of cash off the table, you've got yourself a boss, and that's something you've got to get your head around. And I had to get my head around it when I sold different, I really, really struggled with that for a period. But, I absolutely accepted it. Did I like having a boss? No, I did not. Is that something that I will do again? Almost certainly not. But again, it goes back to one of the key motivators for building this program is I wished I'd had access to something like this when I was going through the sale of different, because it would have helped me with some of my thinking, would have been that kind of sounding board, but also I think it would have given me a bit more understanding of the process and how it was going to play out. And a lot of the time we just need that. We need that extra reassurance. We need somebody who's been there, seen it, done it, even for a sounding board.
Absolutely. And there's something unique about your approach as well, which is very direct, open, transparent. You give the medicine as it's supposed to be. You don't add a sweetener to it. And I think a lot of people should gravitate to that honesty, because if you try and put fluff in your documentation, as you rightly said, it will reveal itself somewhere down the line. So I couldn't have this conversation, and I'm very conscious of time, and I could talk to you all day. So I cannot talk to you without exploring some of the companies that are being formed, and from a BAME background to a minority background to the LGBTQ background, without that, no. How can we encourage greater diversity in startups, because I sincerely believe that some of the problems that me and you have been articulating and going back and forth on are coming because these companies fundamentally are blinkered.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's interesting. So even on launching this program, launched it 11 days ago, 20% of the people applying are women, 80% are men. So just, a flavour of diversity or lack of. And I guess I'll use this opportunity for a shout out to women out there who are looking to come and, sell their business at some point. For God's sake, apply, because I'm really desperate to balance the books. And that goes the same across all aspects of diversity. LGBTQ+, neurodiversity, race, everything. I think the reality is, and the reason that when I was building services, NHS, government, we had multidisciplinary teams and we had user research. Was we were building services for the public, we had to represent every conceivable area. And that is the same with businesses. But we have a really defined process when we're designing and building services to make sure we capture right across the piece every aspect of diversity. We don't have that in business. What we have is ESG targets. If we're a listed company and we're targeting, a B Corp or something like that, but there is no obligation for a limited company to do it. I think that's a crying shame. But if we forget the legality side, the diversity of opinion, diversity of thought, and different approach that different people bring, count me in. I mean, all day, every day. It's just so much more wide and varied than. It's the same reason I wouldn't go and hire a load of little Rachels, other than the fact they'd be a massive pain in the arse. I want a wide variety of thought and opinion.
Absolutely. And like I said, Rachel, you brought the fire today. I'm truly inspired, and I know that my listeners from Mic Drop Club, there's so many nuggets of wisdom there. Reach out to Rachel. I will leave the last segment just for you, Rachel. Any call to action? I know you plugged the course, but anything else that you want to share with the audience before we fade to black?
So I guess my call to action, if you are a founder of a professional services business, so think consultancy, recruitment company, engineering, design, social media, PR, and you're doing 2 to 20 million in way of turnover, and in a minimum of 2 years plus, you are wanting to sell your business, then drop me a DM that says 8-figure exit and I'll be in touch. I'm onboarding the first cohort of people through the program in about a week and a half's time. So that's my final plug, Douglas, of the day. Well, probably isn't, but final plug on this.
Oh, fantastic. Rachel, once again, thank you very much for coming to the Mic Drop Club. It was, like I said, it was truly inspiring, and hopefully we could do another session. The subject matter was very broad, sweeping. I think it's a good time to get a foot in and, introduce you to the listeners and, the great value that you're bringing. And it's rare that I find, an entrepreneur that's giving back in the way that you're giving back, in a way that's candid and honest. And, you're giving the lesson as how it's supposed to be delivered. So, Rachel, have a fantastic morning. And
thank you very much, Douglas. Much appreciated. And you too.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to check out micdropclub.com and get the show notes and useful links. Subscribe to the podcast. Don't just live life. Make life boom.